The city's daily COVID tally below the 6,000 mark for the second consecutive day. BioNTech vaccine for children could be available in Hong Kong next month. And Vladimir Putin announces a partial mobilization as 4 occupied regions in Ukraine schedule votes to join Russia. Good evening and welcome to TVB News. Hong Kong's new daily tally of COVID infections edged up to 5,687 today, with 146 of them being imported cases. But it's the second day in a row that the daily caseload has fallen below the 6,000 mark. Meanwhile, the BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for children could be available in Hong Kong as early as next month. As Christy Khan reports, the vaccine manufacturer has applied for permission to supply the jabs to the city.
The city's daily COVID infection tally is below the 6,000 mark for the second consecutive day. Considering the downward trend over the week, the hospital authority said it will consider resuming some suspended non-essential healthcare services. The Center for Health Protection said there's room to further relax anti-COVID measures.
We understand that the epidemic has eased and there is room for us to adjust some of our social distancing and traveling measures. Details are being discussed and they will be announced when they are available.
4 residential care homes and 526 schools have reported COVID infections. 9 schools have to suspend some classes for a week. Among them, Li Po-chun United World College in Ma On Shan. It has to suspend all classes after 15 students from 2 classes were infected with the virus. Meanwhile, health officials said a 2-year-old boy admitted earlier to hospital remains in critical condition.
He is still in critical condition requiring intubation and ventilator because he has a high viral load leading to serious complications. This has nothing to do with the jab of vaccine he had.
Meanwhile, the government said the scientific committees under the Center for Health Protection will review the data supplied by BioNTech. Later, the committees will make a recommendation to the Health Bureau regarding the administration of the BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine for children in the city. Government's pandemic advisor, Professor Lau Yulong, said he believes the vaccine will become available in October at the earliest. He added the interval between the first and second jabs of the BioNTech vaccine for children is 2 months. And the receivers are advised to take the third dose 3 months after the second jab. Christy Khan, TVB News.
The government is actively looking into the possibility of relaxing quarantine arrangements for inbound travelers. A testing center contractor at the airport is confident it can ramp up the capabilities and speed of COVID tests to cope with an expected surge in demand when quarantine measures are relaxed. Meanwhile, an infectious disease specialist says there should be more flexibility on where infected travelers can be quarantined.
With the easing of quarantine arrangements expected soon, the airport authority carried out a trial run for a major influx of passenger arrivals earlier this month. It was a stress test on the quarantine and COVID testing processes. Currently, inbound travelers can only enter the city if their PCR tests return negative results. One testing center contractor at the airport is confident it can cope with the increased testing capacity. Anthony Wu, chairman of Sunrise Diagnostic Center, said as it will be handling single tube specimens, it wouldn't be a problem to test tens of thousands of specimens per day. He's confident results would come out within 2 hours, and he added there's a lot of space at the airport that can be used to accommodate more laboratories and workers. Wu also thinks that as the virus is highly transmissible, it would be best to gradually reduce the number of days of medical surveillance. Infectious disease expert Dr. Wilson Lam said the city can relax quarantine arrangements as imported cases now account for only a small portion of the total number of infections. He added it's not always necessary for those who test positive to be taken to a quarantine facility in the community. Lam thinks an evaluation can be done at the airport to determine if the traveller can undergo quarantine at home or at a designated hotel.
As quarantine measures for inbound travelers are set to further loosen, many in the city and potential visitors have been rejoicing, but not all are excited for the change. Among those who are concerned are the hotel sector and upscale restaurants. Some fear the scrapping of quarantine hotels and lack of tourists could lead to a wave of business closures. Timothy Lee has the story.
With quarantine hotels possibly soon becoming a thing of the past, Wan Chai's Novotel Hong Kong Century and Tsim Sha Tsui Holiday Inn Golden Mile Hong Kong are among some of the hotels to have recently pulled out of the scheme. Although the current list of quarantine hotels is set to expire by the end of October, 9 hotels, which provide 4,200 rooms, have prematurely terminated their contracts. As of now, there are still 60 quarantine hotels remaining in operation. But the hotel sector noted that the occupancy rate is only at 50%. A spokesperson from the Federation of Hong Kong Hotel Owners is worried that the city is not attracting tourists. She said combined with the adoption of the 0+7 scheme, even returnees to the city might not reside in the hotels. Some in the tourism sector believe that the 0+7 scheme is not effective enough to attract visitors. Timothy Chui, the chief executive of the Hong Kong Tourism Association, said that he believes a 0+0 scheme would address the concerns of the hotel sector and restore the city's attractiveness to foreign tourists. Meanwhile, some upscale restaurants in Hong Kong remarked that locals may prefer flying overseas to eat foreign delicacies instead of supporting local businesses. At the same time, inbound travelers will also not be allowed to enter restaurants for the first week as they will hold the yellow health code during this period. Some in the restaurant sector suggested that high-end restaurants could prepare takeaway meal sets in a bid to retain customers. Timothy Lee, TVB News.
Vaccines for monkeypox will be available for high-risk communities from next month. Authorities estimate that 120,000 people could be jabbed. Vaccinations will start on the 5th of October. 6 social hygiene clinics under the Department of Health, including the Kowloon Bay Integrated Treatment Centre, Queen Elizabeth Hospital and Princess Margaret Hospital, will provide vaccination services for individuals engaged in high-risk sexual activities. Other high-risk groups can make a reservation starting October 3rd and get the jab at 2 designated monkeypox vaccination centres in Yau Ma Tei and Wan Chai from the 5th of October. Frontline health and laboratory staff who are exposed to high risk can receive the jab at the Hospital Authority Staff Clinic and designated Department of Health clinics starting next Monday. Russian President Vladimir Putin announced he had signed a decree to enable a partial mobilization in Russia. This as Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky insisted Kyiv is making gains on the battlefield. Meanwhile, 4 Russian-controlled regions in eastern and southern Ukraine announced plans to hold votes on becoming integral parts of Russia. Daniel Rao tells us more.
In a televised address, Russian President Vladimir Putin announced he had signed a decree to enable a partial mobilization in Russia, with Moscow's invasion of Ukraine having been ongoing for almost 7 months. The mobilization is due to start on Wednesday. Putin said the partial mobilization will mean only Russian citizens who are currently in the military reserve forces will be subject to conscription. He stated it will mainly involve reservists who have previously served in the armed forces with a certain military speciality and relevant experience. Putin said the decision to partially mobilize was fully adequate to the threats we face, namely to protect Russia, its sovereignty and territorial integrity, and to ensure the security of its people and people on what he called the liberated territories. Officials said a total of 300,000 reservists will be called up. Putin also accused the West of engaging in nuclear blackmail, warning NATO and its allies that Moscow also has a large weapons arsenal. He stated that when the territorial integrity of the country is threatened, Russia will certainly use all the means at its disposal. Putin's speech comes a day after 4 Russian-controlled regions in eastern and southern Ukraine announced plans to hold votes on becoming integral parts of Russia. The referendums will start on Friday in the Luhansk, Kherson and partly Russian-controlled Zaporizhia and Donetsk regions. The referendums have been quickly dismissed as illegitimate by pro-Ukraine Western leaders. In his nightly address, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed referendum plans for Ukraine's occupied territories as noise and thanked his allies for condemning the votes. He said the initiative on the front line in the war with Russia belongs to Kyiv, stressing the referendums would not change Ukraine's commitment to retake areas occupied by Russian forces. Meanwhile, Ukrainian energy operator Energoatom said Russian shelling has once more damaged infrastructure at the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant. The operator said workers were briefly forced to start 2 diesel generators to provide emergency power supplies to a cooling pump of one of the plant's reactors. Such pumps are essential for avoiding a meltdown at a nuclear facility, even though all 6 of the plant's reactors have been shut down. The diesel generators were later switched off as main power was restored. Daniel Roll, TVB News.
U.S. President Joe Biden is set to tell the UN General Assembly that Russia's naked aggression in Ukraine is an affront to the heart of what the international body stands for. This as he looks to rally Washington's allies to continue backing the Ukrainian resistance to Moscow. On Tuesday, German Chancellor Olaf Scholz said his country stands firmly at the side of Ukraine as it confronts Russia's aggression. He said Berlin is supporting Ukraine with all its might, financially, economically, with humanitarian assistance and also with weapons. Scholz said Putin's objective was to seize Ukraine, something he dubbed imperialism. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron called on UN member states not to stay neutral about condemning Russia's war in Ukraine. He argued the conflict threatens to usher in a world where the security and sovereignty of everyone no longer depends on a balance of strength, on the strength of alliances, but rather that of armed groups and militias. Japanese Prime Minister Fumio Kishida also addressed the UN General Assembly. He urged a return to an international rules-based order, calling Russia's aggression against Ukraine an act that tramples on the vision and principles of the UN Charter. Protests raged for a 4th straight day across Iran following the death of a young woman in police custody last week. The death of 22-year-old Mahsa Amini, who was arrested by morality police for unsuitable attire, brought domestic tensions in the country to boiling point. Amini fell into a coma and died while waiting with other women to be educated. The morality police enforce strict rules in requiring women to cover their hair and wear loose-fitting clothes in public. Amini's father said she had no health problems and that she suffered bruises to her legs in custody. Meanwhile, the Iranian government has accused foreign agents and unspecified terrorists of instigating the protests. Iranian authorities said at least 3 people have been killed during the unrest so far. A top United Nations official has demanded an independent investigation into her death.
Ms. Amini's tragic death and allegations of torture and ill treatment must be promptly, impartially, and effectively investigated by an independent, competent authority that ensures in particular that her family has access to justice and the truth. Our office has received numerous and verified videos of violent treatment of women, including slapping women across the face, beating them with batons, and throwing them into police vans. The authorities must stop targeting, harassing, and detaining women who do not abide by the hijab rules.
In Tokyo, a man sets himself on fire in protest against the planned state funeral for Shinzo Abe. And police arrest a doctor and 3 private clinic workers on allegations of issuing COVID vaccination exemption certificates without medical consultation. Some migrants recently flown to the upscale Massachusetts island of Martha's Vineyard are suing Florida Governor Ron DeSantis for engaging in a fraudulent and discriminatory scheme to relocate them. The lawsuit was filed in a federal court in Boston. It alleges that the migrants were told they were going to Boston or Washington and were induced with perks such as $10 McDonald's gift certificates. More from NBC News.
Tonight, the battle over the border is building, with a new criminal investigation examining the flights that carried 48 migrants to Martha's Vineyard last week. The controversial move arranged by Florida's Republican Governor Ron DeSantis. A Texas sheriff, Javier Salazar, a Democrat, says the migrants were lured in with false promises of work and assistance.
Our understanding is that a Venezuelan migrant was paid what we would call a bird dog fee to recruit approximately 50 migrants.
Some of the migrants now suing Florida officials.
None of them knew that they were going to be dropped off unceremoniously in Martha's Vineyard.
They were provided an ability to be in the most posh sanctuary jurisdiction.
DeSantis insists the migrants knew where the flights were going and signed consent forms, and that it puts the spotlight on President Biden's border policies, which Republicans blame for the record migrant surge.
If 50 was a burden on one of the richest places in our country, what about all these other communities that have been overrun with hundreds or thousands?
The Department of Homeland Security now confirming there have been more than 2 million illegal border crossings in just the last 11 months, smashing all previous records. While tonight, President Biden responding to unconfirmed rumors DeSantis may send a migrant flight to his home state.
He should come visit. We have a beautiful shoreline.
In Tokyo, a man set himself on fire near the Prime Minister's office early today in protest against the state funeral planned next week for former leader Shinzo Abe. The man, believed to be in his 70s, sustained burns on large parts of his body but was conscious when approached by the authorities. He told the police that he set himself on fire after pouring oil over himself. The man was taken to a hospital. A note apparently written by the man was found with him. It says he is absolutely against Abe's funeral. The planned state funeral, announced by the government a week after Abe's death, has since increasingly become unpopular. Abe was one of the most divisive leaders in post-war Japanese politics. This because of his revisionist view of wartime history, security policies, and cronyism allegations against the former leader. Back locally, police have arrested a doctor and 3 employees of a private clinic for allegedly issuing thousands of COVID-19 vaccination exemption certificates without conducting any consultation. Officers seized vaccination exemption certificates, computers, and $760,000 in cash from the clinic in Yau Ma Tei. Authorities took the 76-year-old doctor back to his home in Chengquano, where they also seized $1.1 million in cash. Officers believe people were paying at least $4,000 for each certificate. Nearly 200 certificates were found on Tuesday alone. The doctor and 3 female staff members were arrested on suspicion of conspiracy to use false instruments, an offense punishable by up to 14 years in jail. That's the news. Thanks for watching.